You drink it bitter. Every morning, without questioning it. But here's something nobody told you. Coffee is not supposed to be bitter. The bitterness in your cup was a decision made by someone else, decades before you were born. And you've been paying for it ever since. Coffee beans are not bitter by nature. In their raw form, they're actually sweet, full of natural sugars, fruity, complex, almost like a berry. When roasted lightly, coffee tastes bright, acidic, sometimes chocolatey, sometimes floral. No bitterness. So where does the bitterness come from? Simple. Heat. The longer you roast a coffee bean, the more its natural sugars burn. And burned sugar is bitter. Roast it long enough, and you don't have coffee anymore. You have charcoal. Which means every bitter cup of coffee you've ever had wasn't bitter because of the bean. It was bitter because someone burned it. So the real question is, who decided to burn it? And why did the whole world just accept that? The answer starts in 1941, World War II. The United States Army had a problem. Millions of soldiers fighting across Europe, the Pacific, North Africa, needed to stay awake, needed to stay focused, needed something to keep them going. The answer was coffee. The U.S. War Department declared coffee an essential military supply, not optional, not a luxury, essential. At its peak, the U.S. military was consuming so much coffee that civilian rationing began back home. American families were limited to 1 pound per week. But here's the problem the Army faced. They needed coffee that could survive weeks in a ship, months in a warehouse, extreme heat, extreme cold, and still be drinkable at the end of it. Fresh, lightly roasted coffee doesn't survive that. It goes stale in weeks. So the Army turned to something that lasted longer. Dark roasted coffee. Heavily roasted beans last much longer than light ones. The oils are sealed in, the moisture is driven out. The bean becomes almost indestructible. And so, 12,000 pounds of coffee were roasted per day in factories built from converted gasoline drums and shipped to soldiers across the world. Burned, bitter, and practically indestructible. Troops drank it by the millions of cups. They had no choice. And slowly, they acquired the taste. When the war ended, millions of soldiers came home, and they brought their taste for dark, bitter, black coffee with them. The American coffee industry noticed immediately. Brands like Folgers and Maxwell House had been selling coffee for decades, but now they had a generation of consumers who had spent years drinking heavily roasted military coffee and had come to expect that taste. So the industry followed. Dark roasts became the standard. Not because it tasted better, not because it was healthier, but because an entire generation had been trained by the military to prefer burned coffee. And the companies simply gave them what they wanted.
Here's what the coffee industry knew, but never told you. Bitter coffee is not higher quality coffee, it's the opposite. When coffee is over-roasted, the natural sugars don't just burn, they destroy the complex flavor compounds that make coffee interesting. A light roast has hundreds of distinct flavor notes. A dark roast has bitterness, and more bitterness. Professional coffee tasters, called Q graders, the people who evaluate the world's finest coffees, almost never drink dark roasts because to them, dark roasting is what you do to low-quality beans to hide their flaws. The cheaper the bean, the darker you roast it, because the roasting process masks bad flavors, which means the coffee sitting in your kitchen right now, the one in the big red or blue can, is probably a low-quality bean, roasted dark enough that you can't tell, and you've been paying for it your whole life, thinking that's just what coffee tastes like.
In the 1990s, something shifted. A small group of coffee roasters in the United States started asking a question nobody in the industry wanted asked. What if coffee didn't have to be bitter? They sourced beans from specific farms, at specific altitudes, harvested at exactly the right moment, and they roasted them lightly. The result was something most Americans had never tasted. Coffee that was sweet, complex, almost wine-like. They called it specialty coffee. The industry called it a fad. But it wasn't a fad. It was the first time most Americans had tasted coffee, the way it was actually meant to taste. Today, the specialty coffee market is worth over $45 billion because once people tasted what coffee actually was, they couldn't go back. So tomorrow morning, when you reach for that cup, ask yourself something. Is this what coffee is supposed to taste like? Or is this what a war, a military supply chain, and decades of mass marketing decided it should taste like? Because the bitter cup you grew up with wasn't nature. It was a decision, made without you. Simple drink. Not such a simple story. If you made it this far, you already know this channel is different. Subscribe, so you never miss a story.